Engines screamed outside, but inside the vast hangar, the air was tighter. Dozens of eyes turned toward one figure, an old man, still and unshaken, facing a storm of uniforms. Whispers spread like static. Who is he? Why won't he move? The guards advanced, hands twitching near cuffs, ready to drag him away. Yet the stranger's palm rested on polished metal, not as defiance, but as if guarding something no one else understood. Tension climbed until laughter died, replaced by unease. And when the crowd finally realized what they were staring at, the hangar itself seemed to change. And it all began in that quiet corner of Hangar 17, where Richard "Rick" Dalton wiped a rag across the silver skin of a forgotten Mustang. The hangar carried the faint echo of cloth on metal. Richard "Rick" Dalton, 88, moved along the fuselage of a P-51 Mustang. The silver skin shimmered under harsh strip lights, rivets bright against shadow. Outside, F-35 engines roared during pre-flight checks, thunder shaking the walls. Inside, Rick kept polishing, circular strokes precise, unhurried. Every stroke seemed to brush time itself away. Beneath the canopy, black script curled in faded paint. Iron Angel. The letters had been restored carefully, by his hands alone. To Rick, every rivet carried a memory of sky. He wore no uniform, only an old leather jacket, seams cracked, collar turned up against the draft. On the pocket, a faint outline of wings barely remained. The hangar doors clanged open. 3 young airmen walked in, boots striking concrete in sharp rhythm. Their eyes landed on the old man, and smirks spread quick. "Hey, Grandpa," one called. "You need a museum pass to touch that thing." The others laughed, their voices bouncing off steel beams. Rick leaned closer to the nose, his rag steady. He didn't answer, his breathing even, as if they weren't there. The faint haze of dust disappeared beneath his hand. Senior Airman Miguel Torres, tall and sharp, stepped forward. His uniform crisp, jaw set, eyes narrowing. "You got paperwork for this?" Rick gave no reply. He rubbed another circle, the metal reflecting his bent shoulders. Still calm, still deliberate. One of the others nudged his friend. "My granddad builds these in plastic kits. Maybe Pop should start there." The laughter rose, meant to sting. Mechanics nearby looked up from their benches. A few stopped mid-task, sensing the spark of trouble. The crowd began to gather, curious and restless. Rick finally straightened. His back cracked faintly, but his stance was tall. Chin raised, eyes steady. He faced them at last. The light carved deep lines into his face. Every crease seemed like a map of years in the sky. For a heartbeat, their smirks faltered. Torres recovered, voice sharp. "This is restricted. You don't belong here unless you're cleared." He jabbed a finger at Rick's chest. From the shadows, a young mechanic paused mid-step. Something in Rick's stance caught his attention. It wasn't frailty. It was balance, anchored like a pilot before takeoff. Torres extended his hand. "ID. Now." His tone left no room for choice. Rick reached into his jacket, leather creaking. He drew out a worn wallet, edges frayed by time. He held it out without a word. Torres snatched it, flipping it open with theatrical disdain. "Expired. Civilian access." He waved it mockingly for the crowd. The others chuckled, but not with confidence. Phones lifted discreetly, recording the confrontation. Rick's face remained unreadable. The young mechanic noticed Rick's hands. Not shaking, not frail. They were steady, controlled hands that had once trusted steel at speed. Torres shoved the wallet back into Rick's chest. "Get out before I call security." His words were harder than his eyes. Rick slid the wallet back inside. Then, for the first time, he spoke. "I was cleared before you were born." The crowd stiffened, caught off guard by the gravel in his voice. Even Torres hesitated, but pride held his stance. He stepped closer, boots heavy on concrete. "You think ignoring me makes you untouchable? Let's see." He reached out, fingers curling around Rick's jacket. The mechanic in the shadows whispered, "Don't do it." But Torres pulled harder. The wallet slipped free, falling flat on concrete. A photograph slid out, skittering across the floor. Black and white, edges curled by age. It showed a young pilot grinning from a Mustang cockpit. And under the canopy, clear as daylight, the words, "Iron Angel." The hangar hushed in an instant. The laughter was gone. Even Torres's mouth tightened as he stared. Rick bent slowly, picking up the photo. He brushed the dust away with careful fingers. His eyes lingered on the ghost of his younger self. He slid the photo back into the wallet, folded it shut. Then he straightened, gaze fixed on the men before him. No anger, only presence. The crowd leaned in, silent, waiting for the next breath. Torres stood frozen, arrogance draining into unease. The photo still burned in his mind. Rick's words cut through the stillness. "Tell your commander. He'll know me." His tone was calm, final. The silence that followed was heavier than any insult. Something far larger than mockery had stepped into the room. Lieutenant Daniel Cross entered with a quick stride, flight binder under one arm. He caught the uneasy hush in the hangar, the cluster of men, the Mustang gleaming under lights. His voice cut clear. "Report." Torres straightened, almost too fast. "Unauthorized civilian, sir." He touched the aircraft, ignored orders. He jerked his chin toward Rick, eager to reclaim control. Cross didn't answer right away. His gaze landed on the faded script. Iron Angel. Something about the name tugged at memory. He moved closer, scanning the polish on the fuselage. The surface didn't look vandalized. It looked cared for. Every mark was the work of reverence, not trespass. Cross asked sharply. Torres fumbled, producing the wallet he'd just inspected. Inside, a dull silver pin caught Cross's eye. He reached in, lifting it carefully. Wings, star at center, combat pilot insignia, old and worn. The edges told a story no surplus store could fake. Cross's throat tightened. He glanced at Rick, saw the way the old man stood, feet planted, weight balanced. Not frailty, training. "You flew her," Cross said softly. It wasn't accusation. It was recognition. The words slipped out before he could stop them. Rick's reply was quiet, gravel rough. "I flew her through fire. We both came back." The line dropped into the hangar like a stone in still water. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Mechanics exchanged glances, uneasy now. The smirks from earlier were gone. Torres tried to recover, voice too sharp. "Sir, anyone could buy a pin. Pose for a picture." Cross cut him off, eyes hard. "Step back, airman." "That's an order." Torres froze, jaw tight, then obeyed. His two friends followed, bravado gone. Cross turned the wallet in his hand, studying the service card inside. The name was faded but clear. Dalton. Richard J. He knew that name. Cross remembered late-night reading, a footnote in an old squadron history, a pilot who kept bombers alive in Europe. Rumor said he should never have survived. He looked up. The hangar was watching mechanics. Airmen. Every rank on edge. Cross chose his words with care. "Everyone clear the circle. Give him space." No one moved. The order was obeyed in spirit, but curiosity anchored their boots. Rick's palm returned to the wing. He let it rest there, as if feeling the heartbeat of old steel. His eyes were far away but unbroken. Cross stepped closer, speaking low. "Sir, I'll need to verify." "May I call it in?" Rick gave a short nod. "Tell them Dalton's here. They'll remember." Cross pulled his phone, thumb flying across the screen. He opened the secure roster, typing fast. The record lit up on his screen, and he felt his breath catch. He read aloud, voice steady but carrying through the hangar. "Dalton, Richard J. 23 combat missions. 14 confirmed kills. Distinguished Flying Cross with 2 oak leaf clusters. Purple Heart." The numbers fell like hammer strikes. Every man in the hangar felt them land. The silence deepened, became something close to sacred. Even Torres's eyes dropped to the floor, his face draining of color. One young mechanic whispered. "That's real," another muttered. "He's been here all along." The atmosphere shifted from ridicule to reverence, the change as palpable as a pressure drop before a storm. Cross pressed a direct line. "Colonel Holloway's office. This is Lieutenant Cross. I need the colonel in Hangar 17 immediately." "Is this about the ceremony?" the aide asked, distracted. "No," Cross said, voice firm. "It's about Dalton, not a story. The man himself." The pause on the line was telling. "We'll inform him," the aide replied quickly. Cross ended the call, slid the phone back. His pulse raced faster than any sortie. He turned to Rick, lowering his tone. "Sir, would you like a chair while we wait?" Rick shook his head. "Not tired, just here." Two crew chiefs approached, eyes flicking between Cross and Rick. "Perimeter," Cross ordered. "Nobody crowds him." They nodded, ushering the younger airman back. Work noises resumed in fragments, tools clinking, footsteps, whispers. But the center of gravity was still Rick. The old pilot stood, jacket creaking softly, hand on the Mustang. A very young airman, maybe 19, blurted nervously, "Sir, what was it like?" His voice cracked, but no one laughed. The hangar leaned in, every ear straining. Rick turned, eyes narrowing slightly, then softened. "Cold," he said. "Engines don't warm you at 20,000 feet. He paused, letting the image settle. "And loud. So loud you stopped thinking. You just acted. Checked your six. Prayed the guns worked when they had to." The boy swallowed. "And after?" Rick's jaw tightened. "The quiet after landing. Counting who came back." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. That silence was heavier than the roar. A ripple of unease passed through the crowd. The kind of truth no textbook could teach. Cross himself felt the chill of it, a glimpse into a world he'd only read about. Rick turned back to the Mustang, brushing the canopy with his hand. "She never let me down," he murmured. The words were meant more for the plane than the men. Footsteps echoed from the far end of the hangar. Heavy, deliberate. The sound of command arriving. Cross straightened, breath held. The crowd shifted, eyes snapping to the doors. Even Rick lifted his gaze. Colonel Reed Holloway entered with his staff in tow. The moment he saw Rick and the Mustang together, he stopped dead. Recognition flared in his eyes, and the room seemed to tighten again. Colonel Reed Holloway stepped into the hangar, his boots striking concrete with authority. The idle chatter died instantly. He froze, eyes locked on the Mustang and the man beside it. Richard Dalton. The name rushed back from classified files and whispered history. For a moment, the colonel looked less like a commander, and more like a boy meeting a ghost. Everyone watched. No one dared breathe. The colonel's voice came low, almost reverent. "Mr. Dalton." The syllables hung heavy, carrying recognition. Rick turned, posture upright despite his age. Neither man spoke for a long second. Then Holloway raised his hand, salute crisp and sharp. "Welcome home, sir." The air rippled. Every soldier in the hangar stiffened, unsure whether to mirror the salute. Torres stood rigid, face pale, his arrogance buried under shame. Rick lifted his hand slowly. Not perfect, not ceremonial, but firm, deliberate. The simple gesture bridged generations. Cross exhaled. Even he felt the weight of the moment pressing into his chest. But Rick's eyes shifted, focus slipping past the present. The hangar dissolved in his vision. Suddenly he was back in the European sky. Winter of 45. The roar of the Merlin was alive in his bones again. Snow clouded the horizon. A formation of bombers crawled across the sky. Vulnerable giants. Rick's Mustang cut through the cold like a blade. Enemy fighters swooped in, black crosses flashing. Tracer rounds ripped past, slicing the air with fire. Rick yanked the stick, body pressed against the harness. A voice crackled over radio. "Brake left, Iron Angel." He obeyed, rolling hard, wings shuddering with strain. A Messerschmitt streaked past his canopy, too close. The smell of cordite filled his lungs. Rick's thumb pressed the trigger. The .50 cals roared. Muzzle flashes strobed the cockpit. Metal shredded. Smoke billowed from the enemy's fuselage. One down, but another latched onto his tail. Bullets hammering his rear fuselage. Glass shattered, shards cutting his cheek. The taste of copper filled his mouth. "Stay alive," he muttered to himself. The Mustang groaned, but her engine held. He rolled again, heart pounding, vision tunneling. His wingman's voice screamed, then vanished into static. Rick called back, again and again. "Charlie 3, do you copy?" "Charlie 3, only silence answered. The memory stabbed deep. That kind of silence weighed more than flak or fire. It was the silence of a friend gone, of an empty sky where a voice should be. Rick blinked hard. The hangar returned the concrete floor, the crowd, the colonel watching. But the war hadn't left his eyes. Cross saw it, and so did Holloway. They recognized the look only combat could carve. Rick's hand slid down the Mustang's canopy frame, fingers tracing the glass as if counting ghosts. Then, without warning, he climbed onto the wing. The crowd gasped. Nobody dared stop him. He moved with certainty, not frailty. Boots found their place like they always had. Rick lowered himself into the cockpit. The canopy creaked as it opened wide. He settled into the seat, every motion fluid, like he had never left. "Sir, that plane hasn't started in years," one crew chief muttered. Torres whispered back, "It can't." But his voice trembled. Rick's hands found the controls. Throttle, fuel, magnetos. Movements precise, ritualistic. Cross's throat went dry. This wasn't showmanship. It was muscle memory, unbroken after decades. Rick murmured, barely audible. "Let's see if you still remember me." His fingers flicked switches, steady as ever. The hangar leaned in, breathless. The Merlin coughed once, sputtered. A metallic whine shivered through the building. Then it caught. The engine roared awake, deafening, primal. Dust blasted from the floor. Tools rattled against benches. The very air seemed to vibrate with raw power. The crowd flinched at the thunder. But no one looked away. The Iron Angel had come back to life. Flames licked from exhaust stacks, orange against silver skin. Gauges on the panel quivered, then climbed steady. Rick's hands adjusted throttle with delicate control. The touch of a man who'd flown this dance 1,000 times. The vibration shook the rafters. Even the F-35 seconds outside seemed muted compared to this voice of history. The Merlin owned the sky again. Colonel Holloway's face was unreadable. His jaw clenched, but awe softened his eyes. This wasn't a relic. It was defiance in steel and fire. Rick sat, jaw set, profile lit by exhaust glow. For an instant, everyone saw the young pilot again, not frail, eternal. The Mustang idled, growling like a caged predator. The hangar smelled of oil, smoke, and memory. Men pressed closer, drawn as if by gravity. Cross whispered to no one. History just woke up. Even Torres, silent now, could only nod. The weight of his earlier arrogance crushed him, leaving him hollow and ashamed. Rick kept the engine running 30 seconds, long enough for every man to feel its heartbeat, to understand what they were witnessing. Then he eased the throttle back. The roar softened to a heavy rumble. Finally, he cut the switch. The engine shuddered, coughed once, then fell silent. The sudden quiet was almost violent. Ears rang. Hearts raced. No one spoke. Rick opened the canopy, climbed down with care but no hesitation. Boots hit concrete, and the hangar seemed to exhale. The moment settled like dust. Unforgettable. Colonel Holloway stepped forward. "Mr. Dalton, with your permission, we'd like you at today's review." His voice was low, deferential. Rick brushed his jacket sleeve, eyes flicking to the Mustang. "I came to see her breathe again," he said. "Didn't plan for more." Cross added quickly, voice rough with awe. "Sir, everyone here just saw history wake. None of us will forget." His words cracked, but truth carried them. Rick gave a slow nod. He reached out, patting the Mustang's skin once. The gesture was farewell, and promised both. Holloway extended a hand. Rick took it firmly. 2 generations locked in that brief clasp. Holloway turned to the men. "Remember this day. You witnessed the sky pay its debt." Not a man moved, every face solemn. Rick adjusted his jacket, eyes finding Torres. No words, no anger. Just a look that said the lesson was over. Torres swallowed hard. He forced himself to whisper, "Yes, sir." The first real respect in his voice. Rick said nothing back. He didn't need to. The Mustang behind him had already spoken louder than he could. The colonel gestured toward the runway doors. 2 hours until the ceremony. "Will you join us?" Rick gave a final glance to the plane. "I will." The word was simple. Final. And the hangar exhaled again as he walked toward the sunlight pouring through the open doors. 3 days later, Hangar 17 was quiet again. The roar of the Merlin was gone, replaced by the soft rasp of cloth against metal. Richard Dalton stood alone beside the Iron Angel, polishing her skin as if nothing had changed. Afternoon light cut through high windows, casting long bars across the floor. The Mustang gleamed under his hand, less like a relic, more like a living companion. Rick worked slow, careful, unhurried. Footsteps echoed behind him. He didn't turn. "Sir?" a voice asked, unsure, softer than it had ever been. It was Torres. The young airman stood at attention, but something was different. His uniform was immaculate as always, but his shoulders carried a weight that hadn't been there before. The arrogance was gone. In its place was something raw humility, mixed with shame, and beneath that, genuine respect fighting to emerge. "I owe you an apology," he said, the words coming out rough, unpracticed. What I said. What I did. There's no excuse, sir. Rick kept polishing, rag tracing a slow circle. The silence stretched, and Torres felt every second of it. Finally, Rick spoke without turning. Fear makes you cruel. Ignorance makes you small. Torres lowered his head. Yes, sir. The words sounded raw, stripped of pride. He paused, gathering courage. But I came back. To face it. Rick finally looked at him, eyes steady but not unkind. That part takes something, he admitted. Most men don't have it. Then he reached into his jacket, pulling out a small box wrapped in faded cloth. Inside lay tarnished pilot wings, old but intact, the silver dulled by decades but still proud. They belong to my wingman, Rick said quietly. Charlie Morrison, 22. Thought he was invincible. He paused, the memory sharp even after all these years. Didn't make it home from our 16th mission. Torres stared at the wings, his throat working. I can't take these, sir. They're not a gift. Rick cut him off, voice firm. They're a reminder. He closed the box in Torres's hand, his grip strong despite his age. Every time you put on your uniform, remember that someone before you paid a price you can't imagine. Remember that arrogance doesn't just make you a fool in the sky. It kills you and everyone counting on you. Torres nodded hard, eyes burning. For the first time, his salute was sharp, precise, sincere. Rick returned it with a simple lift of his hand. Nothing more was needed. Torres left, box clutched tight against his chest, like something sacred. Rick watched him go, then turned back to the Mustang. His hand brushed the fuselage, fingertips tracing rivets like braille, reading a story only he could fully know. More footsteps. Lighter this time. Cross entered, carrying a folder. Sir, he said. The base commander asked me to give you these. He handed over photographs. Rick in the cockpit, the Merlin's exhaust blazing, the crowd frozen in awe. Rick studied them in silence, eyes narrowing at one image, his profile lit by fire, looking uncannily like the boy in the old black and white photo. Cross shifted, voice low. You looked like you never left. Rick smiled faintly. Some days, I didn't. Cross hesitated, then asked the question that had been weighing on him. Why did you come back? After all these years. Rick laid the photos down, gaze distant. She needed to breathe again. Machines like this aren't meant for silence. They're meant to roar. And you, sir? Cross pressed gently. Rick's answer came slow but clear. I needed to remember some things, never fade, no matter how much time passes. The hangar grew still, not heavy, peaceful. Cross nodded, understanding more than the words said. He stood beside Rick, both men staring at the Mustang. Outside, jets screamed skyward, contrails crossing against the blue. Inside, time seemed suspended, tethered to one man and one machine. Rick folded his rag, placed it on the wing, and stepped back. Will you come back? Cross asked. Rick slid into his jacket, leather groaning at the seams. I never really left. He walked toward the hangar doors, sunlight flooding his path. At the threshold, he looked back one last time. The Iron Angel gleamed, defiant, eternal. Keep her ready, Lieutenant, Rick said. You never know when she might need to fly again. Cross straightened, voice steady. Yes, sir. Rick stepped into the Nevada sun, warmth striking his face. Above, modern fighters carved fleeting lines across the sky. But the sound that lingered in memory was older, deeper. If you listened close enough, in the rush of the wind, you could still hear the Merlin sing.